Today, across the United States of America, the machinery of the federal justice system is being quietly, methodically, and ruthlessly rewired. As we move closer and closer to the critical November midterm elections, the current administration is dramatically escalating an unprecedented war on political dissent. And to accomplish this terrifying goal, the administration has completely and unapologetically weaponized the United States justice system against its most vocal critics. We are no longer talking about standard law enforcement practices. We are talking about the deployment of international terrorism statutes, massive criminal conspiracy charges, and complex obstruction of justice maneuvers. These are the exact legal frameworks that were explicitly designed and are typically utilized to prosecute violent drug cartels, international terrorists, and armed insurrectionists. Now, those powerful legal tools are being turned completely upside down and directed against ordinary community protesters, neighborhood organizers, and left-leaning political activists. These aggressive, heavy-handed prosecutions have become a vanishingly tiny fig leaf for the authoritarian ambitions of this administration. If you take away that thin layer of legal cover, if you look past the courtroom formalities and the bureaucratic language, you are left with a political establishment swinging wildly at any perceived threat to its absolute power. One of the most egregious, heartbreaking, and revealing of these cases comes to us directly from the state of Texas. The details of this case should chill every single citizen to the bone. Daniel de Sanchez Estrada is a 39-year-old artist. He is also a devoted father, a community member, and a longtime teacher aide working at a local elementary school. He did not even attend the widely covered July 4th protest that took place outside the Prairieland Immigration and Customs Enforcement Detention Center in Alvarado, Texas. That was the protest where, horrifically and unacceptably, a local police officer was shot and wounded. His wife, however, did attend that protest, and according to the federal court documents filed in the case, she was arrested that very night. She was subsequently charged with rioting and providing material support to terrorism. But notably and crucially for the sake of the facts, she was never accused of the actual shooting. After her initial arrest, she placed a phone call to her husband Daniel. She asked him to simply move a few cardboard boxes out of their shared home. Those boxes contained nothing more than political pamphlets and small, self-published magazines, commonly known as zines. For the simple, mundane act of moving those boxes of printed paper from one location to another, federal prosecutors charged Daniel de Sanchez Estrada with the crime of concealing evidence. They portrayed the married couple as central, dangerous figures in what the United States government officially labeled a North Texas Antifa cell. This is the terrifying reality of our federal justice system today, and it is a reality that demands our relentless and uncompromising scrutiny. If you believe in serious, independent, and fact-driven reporting that refuses to look away when the powerful abuse their authority, I invite you to subscribe to this channel right now so we can continue bringing you the unvarnished truth about the stories that matter most to our democracy. Let us examine that specific label the government used in the Texas case, a North Texas Antifa cell. That is a label that legal scholars, civil rights advocates, and constitutional experts have repeatedly pointed out has absolutely no recognized legal meaning whatsoever. None. Antifa is not a registered organization, it does not have a centralized leader, it does not have a board of directors, and it does not have a membership roster. It is a broad category, an ideological boogeyman invented and weaponized by this administration to frame left-wing activists as a coordinated domestic terror network. Despite the complete absence of any formal organizational structure, a federal jury convicted Daniel de Sanchez Estrada anyway. Following that conviction, the standard pre-sentencing report generated by the court recommended a penalty of 10 to 16 months in a federal penitentiary. But the federal prosecutors saw an opportunity to push the boundaries of the law. They demanded what is known in the legal system as a terrorism enhancement. They based this extreme and severe demand entirely on the so-called Antifa affiliation that they themselves had manufactured, and this past June, a federal judge agreed with the prosecution. That judge sentenced a 39-year-old father and teacher aide to 30 years in a federal prison. His wife received an absolutely unfathomable 70 years in prison for providing what the government claims is material support to terrorists. In total, there were 8 individuals arrested in connection with the Prairieland protests in Texas. Those 8 individuals were ultimately sentenced to a combined 450 years behind bars on various terrorism charges. 450 years. These are the very first sentences to be officially handed down under National Security Presidential Memorandum 7. You might remember that specific executive directive. It was the one issued last September that fundamentally and dangerously treats left-wing political dissent as the equivalent of domestic terrorism. For a necessary and deeply shocking point of comparison, consider how the federal justice system treats different types of political actors. The longest sentence imposed on any of the January 6th defendants was 22 years. That specific sentence was handed down against the Proud Boys leader Enrique Tarrio on a highly severe charge of seditious conspiracy against the United States government, and the current administration, on its very first day in office, completely pardoned him. Let that deeply disturbing reality sink in for a moment. A man convicted of seditious conspiracy against the nation receives a full presidential pardon, while a father who moved cardboard boxes of political pamphlets receives a 30-year sentence under a terrorism enhancement. Counterterrorism experts across the globe have pointed out that these staggering sentences targeting protesters far exceed even the punishments imposed on many convicted supporters of the Islamic State. These intelligence and legal experts are warning the public that this administration is deliberately and maliciously distorting established terrorism laws to criminalize protected First Amendment activity. They are criminalizing the distribution of pamphlets, the hanging of posters, the organizing of community defense networks, and the fundamental constitutional right to protest. Essentially, federal prosecutors are looking at left-wing political expression and they are officially calling it material support for terrorism. The sister of Daniel de Sanchez Estrada, a woman named Annabelle, described exactly what her brother's arrest looked like in the real world. She stated that the government deployed a special weapons and tactics unit, agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, a fully equipped bomb squad, and aerial surveillance drones flying overhead. She reported that there were heavily armored officers carrying military-grade rifles surrounding her brother's civilian truck. All of this extreme, overwhelming military force was deployed over what the government itself admitted was simply a box of printed magazines. This massive display of tactical power was not about ensuring public safety or recovering dangerous contraband. It was, by deliberate design, pure political theater. And the intended audience for that theater is you. All of us, the American people, are meant to watch this spectacle and feel afraid to speak out. You do not have to take my word for who this aggressive show of force is truly meant to intimidate. You can take the explanation directly from the Texas federal judge who handed down this extraordinarily heavy sentence, Judge Reed O'Connor. During the proceedings, he explicitly stated, quote, "The state wants to send a message to anyone who shares similar ideology," end quote. Let us be absolutely clear about what that means. The federal justice system is no longer primarily concerned with adjudicating individual guilt based on facts. It is openly operating as a political weapon designed to send ideological messages. Addressing the court before his sentencing, Daniel de Sanchez Estrada pleaded for basic humanity. He stated, quote, "I worked really hard to be a good father, a good teacher, and a good partner. I am not a terrorist," end quote. But this is the United States of America today. This is exactly where we are as a society. The Prairieland case might be the most extreme example of this judicial weaponization, but it is definitely not the only one. If anything, it serves as a glaring warning sign showing exactly where all of this state machinery is headed if it continues completely unabated. Two distinct stories from just this past week point directly to that terrifying reality. The first story centers on a special education teacher living in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Her name is Treasurer Thornton. She recently detailed her harrowing experience to National Public Radio, explaining that in June, she was simply sitting in her home drinking coffee when armed federal agents suddenly arrived at her front door. She recalled one of those federal agents looking at her and stating, quote, "We have a warrant for your arrest for conspiracy," end quote. Conspiracy. That is a highly serious federal felony that can carry decades in prison. The government formally charged her as part of a sweeping law enforcement initiative known as Operation Metro Surge in Minneapolis. When you look closely at the actual evidence that federal prosecutors cited to justify this massive felony conspiracy charge, you find absolutely no evidence of violence. Instead, you find ordinary meetings, digital conversations on the encrypted messaging application Signal, and basic community organizing. They are effectively criminalizing speech. Uncovering the truth behind these massive federal operations requires immense dedication, resources, and an unwavering commitment to holding the powerful accountable. If you value this kind of deep investigative journalism that refuses to look away from the erosion of our civil liberties, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel so we can keep bringing you the complex stories that the mainstream media often ignores or misrepresents. This brings us directly to the next critical layer of this investigation. How exactly does the federal government find this constitutionally protected speech in the first place? A major investigative report published by the Wall Street Journal this week revealed the terrifying scope of a massive Department of Homeland Security surveillance operation. This operation is not aimed at actual criminals, international smugglers, or genuine threats to public safety. It is aimed squarely at political critics. The investigation uncovered hundreds of federal subpoenas issued directly to major social media companies. The explicit goal of these legal demands was to unmask the identities behind anonymous digital accounts that are critical of immigration and customs enforcement. Federal agents reportedly approached ordinary Americans at their physical places of employment while they were driving on the road and at their private residences. These armed agents demanded that citizens sign formal letters acknowledging that their online criticism of immigration and customs enforcement, quote, may constitute a crime, end quote. The internal government program calls for the aggressive monitoring of nearly 20 different digital platforms, including Reddit, Discord, Snapchat, and LinkedIn. Agents are even authorized to cross-reference this surveillance data with State Department of Motor Vehicles records to track down critics. Outside of the city of Philadelphia, for example, a group of neighbors ran local Facebook and Instagram pages under the banner of the Monaco Community Watch. On those pages, they simply posted sightings of immigration and customs enforcement vehicles to warn their undocumented neighbors about potential raids. For a community page that had fewer than 10,000 followers, the Department of Homeland Security demanded that the technology company Meta hand over the real names, the private electronic mail addresses, and all identifying personal details of the individuals operating those accounts. And who exactly is running this sprawling domestic surveillance operation? Who is asking for this massive trove of personal information? It is the Office of Professional Responsibility within Immigration and Customs Enforcement. That specific office was originally created as an internal affairs division. Its sole purpose was supposed to be investigating federal agents who are accused of corruption, abuse, and wrongdoing. Today, that same internal watchdog has been transformed into an apparatus that investigates the citizens who dare to criticize the agency. Furthermore, the Federal Bureau of Investigation is actively monitoring neighborhood chat groups in the state of Minnesota. These are the rapid response networks that local residents utilize to warn one another about sudden federal raids in their communities. The director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Kash Patel, actually confirmed the surveillance apparatus himself. He recently told the Fox News network, quote, "The Signal chat group is information we collect from the public," end quote. The psychological strategy here is incredibly transparent and profoundly dangerous. The federal government knows perfectly well that it does not have to arrest and prosecute every single protester in the United States. They only have to prosecute a select few, and prosecute them with such overwhelming draconian severity that they make the rest of the protesters wonder, am I next? The goal is to make every citizen second guess their actions. Will my neighborhood Signal chat become federal evidence in a conspiracy trial? What about this Facebook post criticizing a government agency? What about this flyer I handed out at a community rally? Because of this strategy, today, a father in the state of Texas is serving a 30-year federal prison sentence for the crime of moving political pamphlets. Today, a special education teacher in the state of Minnesota is facing felony conspiracy charges that are normally strictly reserved for violent cartel members. And somewhere in this country today, somebody is actively deciding or second-guessing whether to send a text message, whether to warn their neighbors about a federal raid, and constantly wondering who else might be reading their private communications. That is not a system of law and order. That is the fundamental architecture of a dictatorship in the making, happening right under our collective noses. This orchestrated campaign of intimidation is exactly what many community leaders and people of conscience are actively fighting against. When the government effectively criminalizes the very act of dissent, and when society chooses to quietly accept that criminalization, you are no longer living in a functioning, healthy democracy. We can see this dynamic playing out in the stories of people like Reverend Michael Wolfe. He is the senior minister at Lake Street Church in Evanston, Illinois. Last November, he was violently thrown to the ground and arrested by federal authorities while peacefully protesting outside the Broadview Immigration and Customs Enforcement Facility near Chicago. While the charges against him were ultimately dropped, the initial charges were a masterclass in bureaucratic suppression. He was charged with obstruction and disorderly conduct for the supposed crime of walking on a highway. When confronted by authorities in footage featured in the documentary Go Forth Media, Reverend Wolfe stated plainly that he was freely exercising his constitutional rights. He called the actions taking place inside that detention facility evil. He described the center as a concentration camp, and he declared that his conscience called him to that street to speak out against torture. This administration is treating that exact kind of moral dissent as a criminal offense. The objective of this massive surveillance and prosecution apparatus is to force citizens to surrender their right to dissent without the government ever having to formally and explicitly rewrite the Constitution to take that right away. It forces citizens to choose between their own personal safety and living in accordance with their deeply held moral values. That is a choice that no individual should ever have to make in the United States of America. Yet, that is the exact choice being forced upon thousands of Americans every single day. If people simply surrender their rights, if they decide it is too dangerous to live out their values in public, then the authoritarian project has already won without firing a single shot. None of these specific legal cases will actually appear on your ballot this coming November, but you must understand the real underlying question that is printed on those ballots. The question is whether those currently holding power can successfully weaponize the entire justice system to permanently chill political dissent. The question is whether public protest will remain a legally protected form of speech, or whether private digital conversations will be twisted into criminal evidence to lock away political opponents for decades. I want to leave you with the powerful, enduring words of Annabelle, the sister of Daniel de Sanchez Estrada. She is the sister of a man who was sentenced to 30 years in a federal penitentiary over a box of magazines simply so a judge could send a political message. After her brother was handed that draconian sentence, she issued a statement that should echo in the mind of every single citizen who cares about the future of this nation. She said, quote, "The Prairie Land defendants' sentences are part of an ongoing war on dissent. The extreme sentences are a punishment intended to scare and discourage those speaking out against systems of oppression and for those who might be thinking it. But even after all of this, I do not hate this country. Neither does my brother. We can love our country and we can oppose fascism at the same time." End quote. Two things can indeed be true at the exact same time. We can love the promise of this nation and we can stand firmly against the authoritarian forces attempting to destroy it from the inside out. If you believe in defending that constitutional promise, and if you want to ensure that this kind of critical, unyielding journalism continues to expose the abuses of power, please subscribe to the channel now. We will continue following these major legal developments and bringing you the investigative reports you need to stay informed and stay vigilant. Thank you for watching.